Good afternoon, everyone. Jay Bava, and welcome to the virtual presentation series featuring Dr. Jamie Newell. And we will be going over Meher Baba's life in a historical perspective. My name is Susan MacDonald. I'm the historian and librarian of Meher Center. And this is the series that we have started a few months ago to be able to share about Meher Baba's life in historical perspective. This is being recorded, so I just wanted to let you all know that this is being recorded. This will also appear in social media in the future, probably on YouTube. So we request that if you're here, that you are giving your permission to be able to be on there. At the end of the presentation, we will possibly take questions and answers, depending on time. We hope to go for about an hour. We might run over a little bit, especially today. We've got a lot of information to share with you. And today, Jamie will cover the early ministry and silence of Baba, 1922 to 1931. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's making time to come here. And we are kind of broadcasting from Meher Center. This is the Long Lake from Dilruba. And Jamie is also here. And so let me bring on Jamie.
You ready to go? Share my screen?
Yes.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all. Appreciate you coming. There we go. So, as she said, this is Meher Baba in historical perspective. This is talk 4, his early ministry and silence from 1922 to 1931. And these are very formative years. It's a huge transformation. What we're going to do is start with a few corrections from previous talks. Then I'm going to look at some of the historical context of the period of Meher Baba's life from 1922 to 1931. And then I want to focus on 3 important themes that emerge from Meher Baba's activities during this time. And the first theme is just this general theme, which I mentioned, of him establishing himself as an independent spiritual master in his own right. This is a huge transition from being a schoolboy to suddenly, not suddenly over a period of several years, but transforming into a spiritual master himself. Next, as a part of that role, sort of a subcategory is developing his relationship with and training of his growing number of disciples. And finally, we need to really look closely at what Meher Baba meant by what he called his work and what he considered to be his life's mission. And we'll look at all 3 of these areas through the frames that we discussed in the first module, the first presentation, where we talked about his Persian ethnicity and his love of Hafiz and how those themes can be seen resonating through most of his life. So I just want to start out with the errata. You know, in the you used to be, we get a book, and if they didn't proofread it well, there'd be a little note in the front saying errata, and that's what I'm just gonna check some of those things. If you remember, there was a picture that we looked at. I mentioned this last time, but I didn't kind of go into detail. But I spoke with Peter Nordine about this picture, and he had spoken with Meher Baba's sister, Mani, and I may be wrong, but I believe that may be Mani right next to Shireen. But in Lord Meher and in Nashwan's book, The Beloved, and elsewhere, this man is identified as being Shariar. Turns out Mani says it's not Shariar. According to Peter, she said that it is Shar. This is the second son of Shariarji's brother, Kodadad, and Shar and his younger brother, Hulad, are listed on the memorial tower, which was erected recently, which just is to say that he was considered to be very close lover of Meher Baba. Secondly, during my talk last time, I mentioned that Mirwan stayed with Upasni until 1921, and that's kind of true because he stayed through that year, but it was actually January 22 when he left the Sikori ashram. And more egregiously, I was kind of rambling off topic last time and was sharing my speculations, really wandering into the theological realm of whether or not Upasni Maharaj was realized when he threw the stone at Mirwan. Not only should I not have been rambling off on that, but it was just incorrect in terms of the historical record in Baukalchuri's book, Lord Meher. he says clearly that, again, the religious narrative is that Upasani attained realization by 1914, Bao said on page 102. This is the first print volume. And then a few pages later, he says that Merwan visited him at the Khandoba temple in December of 1915. So that's a pretty clear explanation. As I say, I keep trying to stay in the lane of being an historian, but I get caught up in kind of the way theologians like to think about how many angels will fit on the head of a pin and that kind of thing, and shouldn't have done that. So in any case, moving on, we want to look at the historical perspective of Meher Baba's life during this time. And at that time, in 22 to 31, although the First World War had ended in 1918 and the Spanish flu pandemic had ended in 1920, economic and political tensions that flowed from those events continued to affect people. And we can really, I think, resonate with that now, because just as there are political and economic tensions still from the COVID-19 pandemic, a similar type of world tensions were developing after these events. There were civil wars in Ireland, in Germany, and Russia. Benito Mussolini came into power as a dictator in Italy, and of course, a figure who will figure prominently throughout the next couple of decades, Adolf Hitler, formed the Nazi Party in Germany. Also, a little more positive is the first roundtable conference between India and Great Britain was held, and this was just trying to work out whether there could be an independence from colonial rule and all that kind of thing. And this is of particular interest to us and to Baba, because Mahatma Gandhi attended this conference, or the second conference, not the first one, and he met Meher Baba on board the Rajputana in 1931 when Gandhi was on his way to this second roundtable conference, and Meher Baba was making his first trip to Europe and to the United States in 1931. So meanwhile, also in India, there continued to be political tensions between the British colonial rulers and the citizens of India. This is why they were having these roundtable conferences. And likewise, there were also tensions there were these factions in India who wanted to be free of British rule, but each one, of course, was jockeying for power. So there was tensions there between the Congress Party and the Muslims and the Hindus, which erupted. We'll get into that in future installments here. So against all this backdrop of these global and political and cultural tensions, Meher Baba's early ministry began. And so I've identified three themes, but really all of these themes stem directly from the primary theme of this transformation of Merwan. Merwan, the little schoolboy, suddenly or through a transitional phase, he's Meher Baba, the spiritual master. So although Merwan didn't depart Upasani Maharaj's direct tutelage until January of 1922, by 1918, he was already attracting a small following of people in Pune. And according to Lord Meher, it was in 1920, while still he was staying with some followers in Nasik. One of the followers, named Syed Sahib, decided that the name Merwan Seth, remember he was called Merwan, and then as they began to respect him more, people called him Merwan Seth, which is just a little more respectful. But he thought that Merwan Seth was an inadequate title for Merwan. They all regarded him now with a lot of affection and respect. So after some discussion, there was talk back and forth, different names were suggested, and eventually Syed Sahib suggested the name of Meher Baba, and which meant compassionate father. Everyone there agreed. And it doesn't say in Lord Meher, but obviously Meher Baba, Merwan must have agreed too, because from then on, people who knew him and became close to him began to call him Meher Baba. Now, this incident underlines two of the essential categories of value found in the poetry of Hafiz and the life of Meher Baba, which we described earlier. Remember, I was saying that we're going to be looking at these frames kind of as an outgrowth of his Persian ethnicity and his love of Hafiz. There are many patterns which appear in Hafiz, which appear in Baba. One of these, which we identified, is this master-disciple relationship, and another was the lover-beloved relationship. And there's really a crossing over congruence between these two categories. Now, in the context of Meher Baba's life, when we speak of Baba attracting or gathering disciples, this master-disciple relationship, this is where it crosses over into the lover-beloved relationship. It would be a serious misunderstanding to think of this process of disciples and followers gathering around him. It'd be a misunderstanding to think that this was like enlisting new recruits into service, or sort of kind of signing up people to be a follower. From the time he worked in his father's toddy shop, and later when he and Baramji ran their own toddy shop, you remember we spoke about he started a toddy shop in Cosmopeth, Meherwan's simple kindness and charm attracted people to him. And it seems that he readily and naturally developed affectional bonds with the people he met, many of whom became so attracted to Meherwan that they became his followers. And this is a photo, it's labeled as being between 1918 and 1920. Remember, he didn't leave Upasni until 22. So already he had a group of people who respected him, came to him, and there was a little prayer room was set up, which we're going to talk about in a second. But as far as we can tell from the historical record, both the written record and the oral histories, this habit of Meher Baba's of developing deep affectional bonds with those who approached him continued throughout his life. This is the first thing that happened when people came to him. He didn't give them discourses and talk about things. He asked them how they slept. He asked them about their family, and his caring for them personally seemed to repeatedly awaken this loving bond with people. This is just an early example of someone who became very important in his life. It was in 1921. Meher Baba visited Ahmednagar with Upasni Maharaj. He was still Maharaj's chief disciple. And through her connection to Upasni Maharaj, Gulmai Irani, who is, we could do a whole program on Gulmai. She was really an amazing woman. She was really responsible for Meherabad being what it is today, for many of Baba's, even when she was at Upasni Maharaj's ashram, and as a fellow devotee of Maharaj with Meherwan, and Upasni little by little would tell her, "We'll have, make sure Meherwan eats," and eventually he said, "You need to go and be with Meherwan." That's a whole other story. But during this period, he came to Ahmednagar, to her home, and Gulmai by this time, of course, had already developed a deep affectionate bond with Meherwan. But during this visit to Gulmai's home, Gulmai's son Adi, and this is quoting from Lord Meher, says Adi fell seriously ill with a high fever. Maharaj treated Adi with quinine tablets, which he took several times a day. Meher Baba would also visit Adi every day and inquire about his health. Then he would personally give Adi tea or water and help him walk back and forth in the room. Adi recovered more quickly than expected and never forgot the loving care that Baba expressed to him at that time. He thought, and I've heard Adi say this himself in talks, he'd repeat this story. He said, "My mother's or father's love is like a small pond when compared to Meher Baba's, which is like an ocean. It is better I seek the love of the ocean." Close quote. And he would tell that story. And of course, he became, after Chanji, who was Baba's first secretary, he became Meher Baba's secretary for decades. And all beginning with this, all of these relationships seem to begin with these little kindnesses, these little connections. And as I say, it wasn't a recruitment process. It was a lover-beloved relationship that blossomed into a master-disciple relationship. Now, anyone familiar with Meher Baba's life and the training of his disciples will have heard stories in which Baba did not demonstrate this level of kindness and affection towards his disciples. Seems that the greater the commitment of the disciple to follow Meher Baba, the more strict Meher Baba was with them. People who came for a darshan program or just a family visit were always treated with kindness and loving care and asking about their family and everything. The disciples, however, were always held to a higher standard. And much later in Meher Baba's life, his disciple Bao Kalchuri complained to Baba about this type of strict training. And Baba replied, quote, "Because you have accepted me as your master, and I have accepted you as my slave, It is the duty of the master to see that the slave does his duty properly. And because I have accepted you as my slave, I am duty bound to see that you serve me and please me correctly. Close quote. So there was sort of a different levels as the person advanced in their level of commitment to him. He advanced in his strictness in which he expected them to respond. Now, in addition to this developing of affectional bonds, carved into a marble slab in Meher Baba's tomb shrine in Ahmednagar, there are the words, "I have not come to teach, but to awaken." Even so, in addition to establishing affectional bonds and instituting strict training regimens with his close disciples, Meher Baba also spent a significant amount of time teaching his disciples spiritual principles and cosmology during this time that goes on throughout the entire period. Many of these previously undocumented teachings have now been published and are available to us thanks to the Herculean efforts of Ward Parks and the Avatar Meher Baba Trust Publications Project and the Sharia Foundation. Anyone interested in exploring some of these early teachings is encouraged to study the books Infinite Intelligence, In God's Hand, the Tiffin Lectures, and Creation and Its Causes. And Tiffin Lectures were specifically talks to the Mandali. Creation and Its Causes were to the Prem Ashram and Meher Ashram boys. Infinite Intelligence and In God's Hands were still from that period, and things that Meher Baba was generally on a daily basis teaching in one way or another. So this work of training disciples also falls under this third theme of Meher Baba's work. This is the idea of his having some special, hidden, apparently metaphysical work, which he describes as somehow being accomplished through all of his activities, including through the training of his disciples. Everything he did, he said, was a part of his work, which was, he said, had greater implications than what people could see. So once again, an understanding of Baba's conception of what his work was rests on our recognition of how he understood his experiences, his spiritual experiences with Baba Jan and Upasni Maharaj and his other early mentors. In order to understand this aspect of Meher Baba's life and work, it's not necessary to accept his claims of being God realized, of being a spiritual master who was realized and identified with God. However, it is essential to recognize that Meher Baba had complete ongoing conviction in the authenticity and importance of those spiritual experiences, which were initiated in 1913. In other words, I can study him and read about him, but if I want to understand him, I don't have to accept that he's God realized, but I do have to accept that he has, from my experience, I'm going to say, that it's evident that he was absolutely convinced of the authenticity and the importance of those experiences. And that conviction informs his idea of what the work was and everything that flows for the next, whatever it would be, 40 or so years of his life and ministry. So not only did he have this conviction in his own spiritual state, his own spiritual experiences, he claimed that from the time he received the kiss from Baba Jan, his conscious experience of identity with the Godhead remained constant and unbroken. As I say, that's not something that we need to all just accept on his say-so, but it's evident as you follow through his life that he was consistently convinced of this and carried that through his entire life. So it's in this context of this conviction that he undertook what he called his work, to decide, again, whether or not Meher Baba was actually experiencing such a state of realization, or if he was living in a state of delusion, or if he was perpetrating a fraud on his disciples and the public. I think each of those things, as you see more and more of Meher Baba's life and run those sort of questions through your mind, there's evidence that's pretty startling as we go through, but that's for everyone to decide for themselves. But to decide that is not the role of the historian. For the historian of religion, it's simply to maintain an attitude of what we call methodological agnosticism and just try to present the facts as we see them and see what we can make of them. And the facts as best they can be ascertained, and the sources are not always reliable, but we try to get the most reliable and go from that. But myself, having studied Meher Baba's life for more than 4 decades, having met with members of his family, as I know many people who will hear these talks have also done, met with his close disciples, it's clear to me that Meher Baba was absolutely convinced that his early spiritual experiences were genuine. All evidence suggests that this conviction in his own subjective experience and that the work, which he felt was his life's mission, was of paramount importance to him. It's evident that this conviction in this experience is what drove him to dedicate his entire life to fulfilling that mission. And if we don't see that, again, whether we follow along with his conviction, it's clear that that is what was driving what he did on a daily basis and how he worked with his disciples, etc. Now, I've gone into some detail here because without some understanding of Meher Baba's conception of his mission in life, of his work, as he called it, the activities he engaged in throughout his life can appear sometimes unfocused, disjointed, or even pointless. And even during this early period, depending on how we understand it, for a lot of people, it's just kind of beyond them. But if you see it as moving from this conviction, and I'm going to explain a little bit more of that in a moment, I think it becomes clearer. It at least becomes, we're able to kind of follow a sensibility to it. So now later in his life, in the 1930s, when Meher Baba's formal discourses were first published, he described what he felt was the role of the God-realized spiritual individual. So this description may shed some light on how he understood his life choices, which we're going to go over. We're going to kind of survey what happened in these first 9 years. And of course, the remainder of these presentations are going to go through the rest of his life. And this, I feel, kind of forms the basis for somewhat of a clearer understanding of what was going on for the rest of his life. So he said, quote, "As the sun shines because it is its nature to do so, and not because it wants to achieve something through shining, the God-realized person also lives a life of self-offering because of the basic structure of the divine life, which is at the heart of reality, and not because he longs to achieve anything. His life is not a reaching out towards something with the hope of some kind of attainment. The overflow of his being is a blessing to life in other forms, and actually brings about their upliftment from the material as well as spiritual point of view. The life of the master is a life of service. It is a perpetual offering to other forms of his own self," close quote. And that's from, excuse me, the 6th edition, volume 1 of the discourses. So Meher Baba's conception of what he called his work flows from his conviction in his own state of being a God-realized person, as he just described in that discourse. As we see from the previous quote, he also believed that the role of such a God-realized person is to be someone who brings spiritual blessings into the world simply by his presence and through all of his activities. And of course, when you just hear that bare bones, it sounds, well, this guy's pretty egotistical. If he thinks just being there is going to do something. But again, when you see how people responded to him, it's very interesting that either through love or a simple charisma or whatever else, he seemed to bring quite a lot to the table with people and to allow them to stick with him through some very difficult times sometimes. Now, going on to understanding his work, while traveling in Europe during the 1930s, Meher Baba described what he felt was the nature of his work to some of his Western disciples, saying, quote, "It is absolutely impossible for an ordinary man to understand my work. With my universal mind, I work on an unlimited scale for the universe. To understand what I do is not within the bounds of human intellect. I always work for the universe and not for myself. Why would I need to work for myself? I do my work through various mediums. With that object in mind, I visit places, see different sites, or go to plays, films, and do 101 other things. But I don't enjoy movies or the theater as you do. I make them the medium of my inner spiritual work. My every breath does this work constantly, while outwardly you find me doing nothing special. You cannot grasp the internal mystery." Close quote. But you see, what he's describing is congruent with his description previously. Again, how far we want to go with accepting his description of events is up to the listener. But this is very congruent with what he describes in the discourses. Now, I cite these quotations in order to provide some evidence of Meher Baba's own self-concept, his own understanding of himself as a spiritual master. This self-understanding shaped and informed his behaviors and activities during this period from 1922 to 1931, and of course beyond. As I say, this is going to form a foundation for how we understand what Meher Baba was doing in each of these next presentations. Now, one final thing to consider as we survey some of Meher Baba's activities during this period is the idea, this is another one of these frames. Remember, I was saying an aspect of Meher Baba's Persian ethnicity was his love for Hafiz, and I drew out four different, you can find these in the earlier presentations, four different categories of values that are in Hafiz, and we could have picked many more, but these I think are salient and important. And one of these categories was, of course, master and beloved, master and disciple, and lover and beloved. Those are two of them. And this hypocrisy versus authenticity is another one. The reason that this is important here is that due to Meher Baba's conviction in his own spiritual state, it would have been hypocritical for Merwan, now Meher Baba, to behave in a way that was incongruent with his own conception of his life's mission. As I'm saying, he had conviction of his experience. He had his conviction that from that experience flowed his mission and his life's work. And for him to behave in a way that sort of placated others and didn't sound sort of, as I said, that earlier quote could be taken to be a pretty egotistical quote. But rather than be hypocritical, Meher Baba remained congruent with and authentically expressed his conviction in his spiritual state and in the importance of his work. So now a part of this category of hypocrisy versus authenticity includes, if you'll remember, we went over this also previously, the worldview found in Persian Sufism. It's reminiscent of what's called a group called the Malamatiya, who exhibit exterior behavior which is wild and nonconformist while keeping their inner heart pure. It's similar to the idea of the Rend, which appears repeatedly in Hafiz and is variously translated in English as rake or ruffian or pious rogue, or many kind of generally negative terms, kind of a wild man with a good heart sort of thing, a drunkard with a good heart, that kind of thing. So the Rend is the antithesis of establishment propriety. And then finally, it's also similar, this hypocrisy versus authenticity. It's also similar to the worldview of the Kalandaria, who trust that their honesty and the absence of hypocrisy in their lives and behaviors will attract God's grace. The basic point of all this is simply to say that there was a cultural context. The context of Persian Sufi ideology is found in the poetry of Hafiz. There's a cultural context for Meher Baba to be heedless of the opinions of the outside world. Not only was there a context for being heedless, but it was actually a sort of a badge of courage to just not even take any heed whatsoever, and it was helpful when the world was criticizing him for that. It seems that it was important for Meher Baba to be authentic to his spiritual vision in the same way that Hafiz celebrated authenticity in his ghazals. And there's lots more can be said about that, but as I say, as we go through his life, these ideas are going to be more and more evident that he's completely heedless. And more to the point, Meher Baba actually welcomed criticism and slander against himself and his disciples. He wouldn't let them defend him. He wouldn't let them speak out at one point, Mera's uncle, Colonel Irani, who actually was bitter because instead of going to live with, when Mera's father passed away, instead of for her mother and her going to live with him, they went and lived with Baba. And he was so angry about that he became a great critic of Baba's, started all this propaganda. And I remember I talked about the Memorial Tower, where all these great lovers of Baba were put on this at Baba's direction. It was only built recently, but Baba put it in the trust deed. But Colonel Irani is on that tower. So he frequently expressed the opinion that criticisms like that, like those of Colonel Irani and many others, would not only help his work, but it would help to build the personal character of his disciples. So it was also a part of the training of the disciples for them to just let people say what they wanted. And I know Audi and many of them would become just absolutely enraged. One time, Audi got very angry at a man who had come and insulted Baba, and Baba made him go and before the man could leave, he was sitting in his car, and he made Audi go and bow down to the man in his car. And the man actually eventually came back and was very sympathetic to Baba. But at that time, it was extremely humiliating for the disciples. But Baba said it would help them build character by accepting that. So with that rather lengthy setup and framing of Meher Baba's life and ministry during the formative years of 1922 and 1931, and as I say, I think this supports, these themes will continue to be relevant as we look at other periods of Meher Baba's life. But I want to now survey some of Baba's actual activities during this formative period. And let me just say off the top, lots and lots of stuff went on. There's no possible way we could cover all the just amazing things that went on. But I'm going to try and hit some of the salient points. I won't even hit all the salient points, but some of them, and we'll see what we can come up with as we go along. So just starting at the beginning, the big event really is that he leaves Upasani Maharaj's ashram for Mumbai, and never again does he live in his family home. Now, the story is that he didn't go right to Pune. He went to Mumbai to, if I remember the man's name was Munshi Rahim, I think, something like that, a Muslim man who he had become a follower. He's in that group of people that we saw in that photo earlier in Cosmopeth. But he went there. He had not had a bath for several years. And there were even like lice in his hair, and he was just a complete mess. And Munshi Rahim, if that's the name, I remembered it correctly, convinced Baba to take a bath. He took a bath there. And from there, he cabled, or not cable, what they called, telegram, sent to Sadashiv Patel, another man who had become a follower in the Cosmopeth area. He cabled him and asked him to build a little hut on Ferguson College Road, a little jopti, 10 by 6 foot hut on Ferguson College Road. And this is Meher Baba playing an instrument and singing outside of that hut. So he went to Mumbai, and then he went from there. Once Sadashiv Patel had built that little hut for him, he went and stayed in that hut. And while he was there, he became closer then to Adi K. Irani. He met Sarosh Irani, who became very, very important in his work, was one of the Manzil-e-Meem disciples. We'll talk about Manzil-e-Meem in a second. Padri, many of us have met Padri, Fardoon driver. He met him at that hut. Actually, Padri's mother, who Peter Nordine knows all these family connections, but she was related somehow to Mera. I can't remember what the relationship is now off the top of my head, but she had become a follower of Baba's, and she would send Padri Fardoon, her son, to bring him this, bring him a box for me or something like that, and just to kind of trick Padri into going there. And Padri said, "I'm not interested in this spiritual stuff." And so but eventually, of course, he met Meher Baba, and as I say, this loving connection began to develop. And Padri was another one who became a lifelong devotee. again, all at this little hut, Ferguson College Road, living for the first time on his own in a hut, and for the first time assuming and expressing and affirming the mantle of his being an independent spiritual master, no longer the chief disciple of, I mean, he still was very respectful of and still a disciple of Upasani, but he was now a master himself and recognized by Upasani as a master. So he continues to attract new disciples and to solidify relationships with existing followers. As I say, Gomai and Adi would go there continually, and he stayed in that hut until May, again, consolidating these Cosmopeth followers who had already been there, attracting new followers like Padri, and he gathered more and more of these followers that it's the same picture we'd seen before. I think it's Munshi Rahim is the man who was, I don't know which one he is, but he's in there. Now, during this period, he also met Ramju. He also made a new connection with his oldest school boyfriend, Ghani Munsif, Dr. Ghani Munsif. And he instructed Ramju to keep a diary. And this is the first of a lifetime of disciples documenting his every movement and action. And one of the remarkable things about Meher Baba, one of many remarkable things about him, and there's ample, I mean, even any historian, studying all the evidence there is would have to attest to this, is that he, except for one period, which we'll talk about in a minute, throughout his entire life, particularly his entire life after this period when he begins to live in this Jyoti and is a master in his own right, he was never alone. He had people with him, and it was always very casual. He had very different excuses for it, but he'd have a night watchman. Sometimes they'd be in the room with him. Sometimes they'd be just outside the door. But except for one little period of a couple days, and Erich Jesewal describes a time when he had to go back and get some clean clothes because they'd fallen into a messy water main area. And he left Baba for 30 minutes or an hour or something. But other than that, he said he didn't know any time that Meher Baba had been alone. And so that's a remarkable detail. Second remarkable detail is that, again, just casually, one of his disciples at all times, he would tell him he didn't monitor it. He didn't even ask to look at it. We would tell each of them to keep a diary, sometimes several at a time, to document just what was going on at the ashram, what was going on, what he did, what he said, that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of the publications that I mentioned earlier were drawn from some of these diaries, they're drawn from people taking notes when he was talking. But this is a really remarkable thing that so much, this is why Bao Kalchuri was able to draw from these diaries and create an almost 7,000 page biography of Meher Baba. So it's just as an oddity of humanity. Very few people in the world have never been alone except for a few hours. And in other words, someone always knew what he was doing and often they were writing it down in a diary. And all through his life, this was going on. So just an interesting fact that will help to inform, of course, the stories we're able to tell through these different presentations and just throughout his life. So as again, he stays in this little hut until May, and then he's gathered by this time 45 people around him, 22 Hindus, 12 Muslims, and 11 Zoroastrians. And he decides that they're going to set up a little, not exactly an ashram, it's really more like a training place, but they've rented a place in Bombay, and he's going to have them walk. Now, remember, this is all part of this training that I was talking about. He's both teaching, he's training obedience, he's training, these are people who've made commitments. Often he actually has them write down that they make a commitment, I'm going to stay with you for X amount of time, and have them sign things. But they left from Pune, and they walked. This is the route they walked. And if you ever traveled that route by taxi, particularly if you'd done it 30 or 40 years ago, it was pretty rugged then, much more rugged in the 20s. It's a little bit nicer now, but it'd be pretty difficult to do it on foot because it's all highways and things. But this is quite a difficult walk. So they complete that walk, and the stories accompanying that are very interesting. And if you're interested in that, a lot of it is documented in Lord Mayher. A lot of really interesting personal documentation is found in the published diaries of Ramju. I mentioned that Ramju was keeping a diary. So Ramju's diary says really wonderful accounts, wonderful, but also kind of terrifying, because it was a very, very difficult walk. They had a very difficult time, but they made it. They made it to what a building which they called Manzil-e-Meem, which means House of the Master. And that was in the Dadar section of Bombay. Now this is, I don't know all the people here. This is Sarosh. I don't know if you can see my little cursor there. That's Sarosh up at the top. Next to him is Bidal. This is Dr. Ghani, Mayor Baba's school friend. They were schoolboys together at St. Vincent's High School, and I think before. We talked about Adi Kairani, Gulmai's son. This is Adi here. This is Ramju next to Adi. And of course, this is the most important disciple. This man, Gustaji, had been with Sai Baba. Sai Baba sent him to Upasni Maharaj, and Upasni Maharaj sent him to Meher Baba. So he was those three masters, serving them as disciples. And then Meher Baba, during different periods, had him go and look after Babajan, who was still living in the 20s. And he had her take care of Babajan, and he said he had to stay with her constantly. And Babajan, someone had given her a mattress. And if you've seen these Indian mattresses, they're kind of like a futon. And during the monsoon season, Gustaji had to follow, pouring down rain, soaking wet cotton mattress. You can imagine it must have weighed 100 pounds. And he had to drag along through this very, very, very eccentric elderly woman who, according to Meher Baba, was the perfect master, the one who kissed him and gave him realization. He had to follow her around with this soaking wet mattress in the pouring rain. And so he'd been through quite a lot between those three masters and Meher Baba. He went through a lot. So that's just some of the disciples who went with him to Manzil-e-Meem. And they stayed there from March of 1923, and then they closed the Manzil in 10 months later, which I'm not sure, I didn't write down the date of that. But after this period, the group went to Kushru quarters in Ahmednagar for the wedding of Rustam and Freni Irani. Now, I mentioned Gulmai's son, Adi. Her other son was Rustam. Freni Irani is Mera's sister. Those of you who are familiar with Meher Baba's story, we're going to talk about Mera in a minute. She was the chief woman disciple. She didn't enter into the picture quite yet. But because Rustam, one of the close, the Meher Baba's disciples by this time, he called his circle, and circle means the word for circle, I think it's Sanskrit, but whatever language, is mandali. So you'll hear throughout these presentations, when we talk about the mandali, we're talking about the circle, or the circle of disciples around Meher Baba. So Rustam was one of these close mandali. He was getting married to another person who was a follower. So the whole group went up to Ahmednagar for this wedding. And they stayed at Gulmai Irani's family residence, which was the home, of course, of Adi K and Rustam, the man who was getting married. And this is the whole wedding party. And notice Meher Baba was not there. The Parsi and Irani community continued to be very, very much against him. They just thought that he was a madman, or that he was leading people astray now, because it was another thing that we haven't mentioned and isn't talked about a lot, is that it was Parsis, Iranis, Zoroastrians do not typically have spiritual masters, and they do not have the whole concept of God realization and all that did not exist in the traditional ideology of Zoroastrianism. So for him to claim any kind of spiritual status outside of being a dastur, which is simply a priest who tends the fire temple, that kind of thing, was just, it made no sense to anyone. It was Gulmai received all kinds of criticism, because not only was she first following a Hindu master, Upasani Maharaj, but then she was following this Merwan, who was everyone knew was a crazy person who had lost his mind back in Pune, and was following this crazy Babajan lady. So there was lots of hostility. So some of this hostility spilled over at the wedding. During the wedding party, Baba became fed up and said, "I'm not staying around all these people who are going to, if they're not, it can't at least be decent to me and my Mandali. They don't have to believe in me or believe in my Mandali, but they could just show, normal courtesy and normal respect." So he stormed off, and he ended up walking to this military camp. He just walked and walked and walked, and there was no way that he could have known through normal means, as far as I understand, that where he was walking to was actually owned by the host of this, the father of Rustam and Adi, Kaikushu Irani. But this military camp where he walked there, and the Mandali at this time had a standing order that they had to follow him wherever he went. So when he started going, they all grabbed their stuff and they followed him, and he just walked in as many, many miles. And he came to this military camp, which eventually became what we know as Mehrabad and the center of his activities. It took his followers 6 miles south of Nagar. They walked there, and eventually they returned there to repair this abandoned military camp, which was to become Mehrabad. And 13 of his followers of this group agreed to stay with him under even more austere conditions than they had when they were at the Manzil-e-Meem. And again, I'm sort of editing this down. If you want to know more about it, again, Lord Mayhair and Ramju's diaries covers some very intimate and bone-chilling details of what they went through with this entire experience. So now, after doing all this, this was from May to November of 1923. Now remember, he'd only left Upasani Maharaj's ashram in January of 22. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of really, really difficult work and activity, the walking tours and the trainings and things that they were going through. So he takes 11 of the people who had been there, and this is some of them in this, this is their gear for going on this trip. He takes them to Agra, Karachi, Quetta, Ahmedabad, and Gujarat, followed by a 62-mile walk to Navsari. So again, this is all part of training and all part of a very rigorous, difficult time. Now, this is, in this picture, this is Gustaji again. If you can see this, I don't know if you see my cursor, I hope you can, to Meher Baba's right. Our left is Gustaji. Next to him is Meher Baba's brother Jal. Right behind Meher Baba's left shoulder is Adi. In the very back, the big burly man with the mustache and the big blanket over his shoulder, that's Meher Baba's uncle, Masaji. And who else? Ramju is in the very back there. And Padri is on the very, an R, as you look at the picture on the right, the very one in the back is Padri. And I don't know if I can identify anymore. Oh, that's Pendu in the very middle. He's got a very smart turban, and the blanket over his right shoulder is Pendu. So a lot of people that many of us met in early years at Mirzad after Meher Baba passed are in this photo. So now this is the period. So he does this. They do in this really grueling tour from May to November, and then beginning in November, he wanders incognito with Gustaji and Behramji, fasting severely, and then he returns to Pune and then to Bombay. Now you can see again at a glance, this seems. How do we make sense out of this? Well, going back to that question of the master, through his every activity, brings some sort of spiritual benefit into the world. Apparently, as he describes it, this is part of what he was doing. Now, again, this is a map over on the right, which shows exactly, if you can imagine, there's Mehrabad on the very bottom right here, all the way to Bombay. Then they walk up to Marwar, over to Hyderabad, Karachi, and up to Quetta and back. And very grueling tours. One of it's kind of the first of many tours like this that he did later. in different phases of his work. So February of 1924, he takes 8 followers to Persia, but cuts the tour short due to illness and returns to India. He takes a few disciples to Nepal, but they are refused entry. And again, this is another map of their travels during this period. He sends all of his disciples home, and he wanders alone for some days. And this is the one I was talking about, where this is one of the only times that he was alone in his entire life after this, after leaving Upasti Maharaj's ashram. This is the last time in his life that Meher Baba does not have someone with him 24 hours a day, every day. And most of the time, if not that person, someone in the ashram was keeping a detailed diary of what was going on every day. So in March of 1924, with his core mandali, he settles once again at Mehrabad, and he initiates what he called Gamela Yoga, which is a hard labor phase. Now, Gamela Yoga is kind of a joke that they made about it, because they said their yoga was to do work, and the Gamela is this kind of tin, it's like a wok, which the coolies would wear on their heads when they're doing work, and they fill it with rocks and dirt and move it from one place to another. So they were clearing out Mehrabad. It was an abandoned camp. They were creating buildings and just flattening out the land in different areas, and very, very, very hard manual labor. And none of these people some of them were from middle-class families, and they were not used to this kind of manual labor. And so they jokingly called it Gamela Yoga, and it was later referred to as the hard labor phase. Now, also in 1924, Meher Baba is later to be his chief woman disciple, and Meher's mother, Daulat, and 2 other women joined the group as cloistered nuns in the old post office building, which is at Mehrabad at that time. The stones from that building were later moved and used to build Meher Baba's tomb shrine, the Samadhi on the top of the hill. But they lived there first. It was the first place they lived at Mehrabad. And simultaneous to this, when they left Pune and started to live with Meher Baba, simultaneously Meher's uncle, Colonel Irani, began a campaign of propaganda against Baba, and saying that he was a charlatan and a fraud, and he was duping women and all kinds of bad stuff. And Baba would not let anyone respond. Everybody, they wanted to write letters to editors and publish articles, and Baba said, no, keep mum, as they would say, be quiet, don't say anything. So then in June to December, he goes with the core of men disciples to Bombay, Karachi, Quetta, then to Madras, Calcutta, Hardwar, Rishikesh, Baroda, Goa, and during that time, he bows down to 5,000 pilgrims and lepers. Can you imagine? 5,000 pilgrims and lepers he bows down to during this, again, very grueling tour with a group of core disciples of these people who'd been working with him at Mehrabad. In January, he returns to Mehrabad, and the resident mandali grow to a number of 40. There are now 40 who are there, devoted, committed to him and working. Large groups of people begin to come. Thursdays and holidays, there are public darshans. You can see this is one of the holidays when groups are gathered around him. They're coming for darshan. On July 9th, now in 1925, at 8:30 p.m., he announces, I'm now going. From tomorrow, I will not speak for 1.5 years. Now, I have if you look on the Meher Center website, I have a whole talk about Meher Baba's silence. It's more from a theological perspective, but it covers more details. It's an extremely important phase of his work, because it continues he said, oh, I'll be silent for 1.5 years, but all indications are that he intended from the beginning to never speak again. And as far as we know, he did not utter another word after July 10th of 1925. He began his lifelong silence, and he stayed during this time in July. He stayed in his Jopti at Mehrabad, wrote in his book, and the book is a whole other thing, but it would just suffice to say that he wrote in a book daily at the beginning of his silence, and he continued to work on this book for many, many years. In October, he shifts to this table cabin. You see this little picture down here. It's still there at Mehrabad, and it was under a neem tree by the road. He continued writing in his book, and he would give darshan to visitors by just sitting in that little overhang in the front of the cabin. He'd come out and he'd sit with visitors there in front of the cabin, and then he'd retire back into the cabin. November 19th, he lit the Dooney fire in response to a villager's plea for rain. 15 hours of rain ensued, and that began the habit of monthly lighting of the Dooney fire on the 12th of every month. And that's continued since 1925, November 1925, until, or I guess the 12th would have begun in December, but whatever. Until today, they still light the Dooney every 12th of the month. And that's, again, a whole other story, what the Dooney is and all that, but you can look that up. Now, a large hall, because so many people were beginning to come, a large hall called the Sai Darbar Hall was built near the post office, which, if you're familiar with Mehrabad, the area, it was built in the area between the railroad track and the road, not on the other side of the road where most of the lower Mehrabad buildings are, but between the railroad track and the road is where this Sai Darbar Hall was built near the post office to accommodate large crowds coming weekly for darshan. Marathi arti was sung in his praise. In 1926, Meher Baba composed the Bujawe Nar Gujarati arti, and now from that time on, both the Gujarati and the Marathi artis were sung. At this time, the first Meher school was built. Other structures were built and services provided. And this began, when this happened, Mehrabad just exploded into really a city. Around 500 people are living at Mehrabad. A few dozen dedicated mandali were living under Baba's strict orders, and the rest were sort of people helped with the school. There was a hospital there. Some mandali worked at the school, some worked in the hospital, but there were lots of peripheral people who did all kinds of different things related to the services that were being provided by Baba and the people at Mehrabad. Now, the Tiffin lectures that I mentioned began during this period, and they continued through late 1927. Again, this is just more teaching about cosmology, about the spiritual path, things like that. Now, in March of 1926, Baba moved into a box cabin in the Sai Darbar Hall. They made a little cabin in there, and just like he had lived in the table house, he stayed in there. And then in May, he began a 2-month stay in the water tank room on the hill. And this is the water tank. We now know it as the Meher Retreat Building. There's an upper floor, and there's we call it the Tower Building. Sometimes it's got a yellow, it's painted yellow. On this side, on the right, as you look at the picture, it's a room where Meher and the ladies lived for a long time. And on the left side, the men in the 3 Incredible Weeks used to hold meetings in there. This little square building in the front of that is now a library, and that room where men met during the 3 Incredible Weeks is now a museum. So he began sort of a seclusion stay in that water tank. He had to climb up. There was no entrance at that time. He had to kind of climb up over the top through one of the windows and go in there and go in seclusion there. Now, in October, all of this, remember, there's a huge city there. In October, he dismantled Mehrabad and he relocated everything to Lonavala. In November, October, remember, we're just talking a month, October to November, he returns to Mehrabad, rebuilds everything, starts the Hazrat Baba Jan School for Boys. So he closes one school, immediately opens another school. I remember my father-in-law, my wife Zoe was trying to, get him, just tell me, we're so excited about Baba, want him to know something about Baba. And he seems like a nice guy, but he just can't get his act together. He can't decide what he's going to do. He does this, and he tears that down. He does something else. It's a shame he never really could, get focused, and that's the way it looks when we look at it this way. When we look at it, as I described earlier, as his, both as a way of teaching and a way as expressing, as he said, this spiritual state that he experienced, which one makes more sense? Well, this is for the listener to decide, but it certainly is startling. And I would hate to be the ones who had built the first school and then had to tear it down and then come back a month later and build the second school. But you certainly had to learn obedience to just do it without asking any questions. So at this time, now in 1927, he stopped writing and he began using an alphabet board for the first time. He used to write on a slate for a long time, but now he was using an alphabet board. And in May, he opened the Meher Ashram for Boys and shifts it to Mehrabad Hill. And you can see all of these, those of us who remember Alaba, this 1, 2, 3, the fourth from the right little boy there is our friend Ali Akbar Shapurzaman, known as Alaba. That's a whole other story why he's called Alaba. We'll get to that. But so he opens the Meher Ashram for boys and shifts it to Mehrabad Hill. In October, 170 boys are enrolled, 14 of them for Persia, into this Meher Ashram school. The women Mandali begin living in an enclosed compound on the hill, which was sort of attached to this room that we're looking at here, where the boys are sitting in front of it. They were staying in that room with a sort of a tata enclosure, kind of protecting them from prying eyes. So they were in purda, as they say. So during this time, in December 1927, Meher Baba began staying in a crypt room. Now, again, we could do a whole presentation just on this alone, but this crypt room, which we can see this little door right here, that was a pit was dug there, and he would go down there and meditate. Sometimes the Prem Ashram boys would go down with there and meditate with him. Sometimes he would meditate down there, then he'd come up to a little platform. But that room is now, that space, I don't know if it's the exact same door, but a lot of the same stones and everything are Meher Baba's samadhi, his tomb shrine. So it's very interesting that with all these devoted young boys there who is teaching, and again, strong affectional bonds between all of them, he did what he called his spiritual work, meditation, and work with these boys, which would appear was preparing this ground for what was going to be a place of what today is a place of world pilgrimage. So in January of 1928, a love outburst swept through the Prem Ashram and the Meher Ashram. When the sort of outburst of love through the Meher Ashram occurred, then Baba took the boys who were being particularly overwhelmed with this love that was being apparently pouring out from him and affecting them. Some people, some of the parents said that he was driving the boys mad, but the description of Ramju and others is that they were Baba was pouring out so much love that they were just absolutely enraptured and wanted to be with him all the time. Some were having spiritual experiences. This is a boy named Chota Baba, who had experiences of the plains. I don't remember this gentleman's name, but there's another one named Ali, and I'm going to tell you about him in a moment. I've got a whole series on video that I hope you'll be able to follow up and look at. But Baba remained in this crypt room until the end of February, and he fasted until the end of April. And again, some of these fasts are just too astonishing to imagine anyone could survive that long, but it's reported that he fasted quite a lot. Now, in March of 1928, he sent Rustam Irani. Remember, Rustam was the one who got married. He sent him to the UK to bring boys from the West because he wanted Western boys in the Prem Ashram. Rustam was not able to get any boys whose parents would agree to let them go, but he did while there meet a man named Meredith Starr and his wife Margaret Starr, and they became influential in spreading his name and his work to people in Britain. And he ended up being instrumental, really, in Meher Baba's first trip to the West and to Europe and Great Britain. And in April, it was a momentous occasion when Hazrat Baba Jan herself came to Mehrabad. She met Baba and the schoolboys right near the railroad tracks. Again, it was that same area between the railroad tracks and the road. She didn't go up to the hill, to Mehrabad Hill, nor did she go to Lower Mehrabad. She just stayed right in that little area between the railroad tracks and the road. Now, June through November, again, we just heard about them tearing down the school, coming back a month later and rebuilding it. Now, he said, okay, take down the entire Mehrabad colony and shift everything to Toka, which is, I don't remember how far away. It's on the way to Ellora, but it's a long ways away, too far. And this is a picture of everyone at Toka. You can see actually on the end here is Meredith Starr. On the other side is Margaret Starr, Meher Baba in the middle with the Prem Ashram boys all around him. But Meredith Starr, this man that Rustam had met, him and his wife came to India to stay for 6 months. As I say, they were instrumental in some of the early Westerners coming. In November, the Toka Ashram went. Now remember, okay, so in June, they took down the Mehrabad Ashram, moved it there, and stayed there in Toka until November. And in November, they dismantled the Toka Ashram. Most of the boys were sent home. Most of the Mandali were sent elsewhere. Baba and the core Prem Ashram boys and the Mandali returned then to Mehrabad Hill. And he again started up a smaller school just for the Prem Ashram boys on Mehrabad Hill. Now, again, there's many more events. We're already running out of time. Much happened between 1929 and 1931. One of the most really interesting events, I think, most intriguing work during this period began in 1927 and extended into the early 30s and Meher Baba's early trips to the West. And this involved a young boy from the Prem Ashram named Ali. He was a Muslim boy. And if you're interested in that period, there are two 20-minute videos on the topic that I've made. They're more theologically based than these. I'm trying to stick to historicity with this series, but these are a little bit more theological speculation in them, but it covers some very, I think, interesting facts about Meher Baba's work with Ali and how he played a role in, he was one of the few people. Only 3 people went with Meher Baba to the West on his first trip, and Ali was one of them, this Prem Ashram boy. And so we talk about that in these 2 videos, but that's what I have to pretty much for today. I've really raced through. There's much more there. I encourage you, if you're interested in this period, to look at Ramju's diaries, to look at Lord Meher. There's much more detail there. But meanwhile, I'm going to be, there won't be a talk next month in June because I'll be in Mehrabad myself. But back July 21st will be the next talk. And then we're going to talk about Meher Baba's first travels to Europe, which will involve Ali and Chanji will be with him. And he also ends up going to the United States. And there's a variety of controversies that result from these periods. So we're going to talk about those next time. And thank you all for your attentive listening.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing all of this. We really appreciate you doing an overview and some deep dive into Baba's life and ministry, especially during that time period. Everyone here, as you see, the next talk, number 5, will be given on July 21st on Sunday. We definitely encourage all of you to join. So again, thank you so much, Jamie. This was really informative, and we really appreciate all of your efforts and research into this. And thank you for also including a lot of the footnotes and the research sources that you've taken a look at. We really appreciate that. And that will also be available not only when we have it online for our social media YouTube channel in the future, but it will also appear on the Meher Center website so that anyone who is curious, feel free to take a look at not only the talk, but also the resources as well. Unfortunately, we have run out of time and we won't be able to do Q&A today. But if you do have questions, feel free to contact me or separately to Jamie, and we'll be happy to help you with any questions that you might have with this. If you'd like to unmute and say Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai at the end, you're more than welcome to. We'd love to end like that. All right.
Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Hey, Baba. Thank you, everybody. Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Thanks, everybody.
We Bob, everyone.
Thank you,
so
Susan.
much. Much love
See
to
you
you
next
all.
time.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you all.
Thank you.